We are live, and this is conversations. To welcome our first-time viewers, even those that joined us last week. So this program is an initiative to understand what inequality in Zambia and I did an album called Here I Live, and the theme for the album quality. And this program is a follow-up album to help people understand what inequality is and what exactly should we do as a people. Because I believe the real power, the actual form of power, is the people power. And if inequality is a problem for, then the people themselves must lead the struggle to challenge and address the inequality issues. So this program is about, and we'll keep on bringing people that are involved in the struggle, people that are involved in addressing inequality in Zambia and anywhere else. Uh, this week, I'm joined by Eneya Maseko. Eneya Maseko is the governance manager at Oxfam, Zambia, and he'll be telling us obviously a little more about inequality and the work that he does and the work that Oxfam in Zambia is doing in Zambia, and obviously how the general public, the people, can get involved and address inequality. Uh, Yama, the ball is yours. So first, before you get in, the format for the program is that you have to you make a presentation for about 15 to 20 minutes. During this period, I will not ask you, I will not interrupt you, and I will just listen to you. And then after the 20 minutes or the 15 minutes, then I'll ask you questions, and I'll also get questions from our viewers, and then you'll be able to respond to those questions. So you can pick it up.
Thank you so much, Fumba, aka Pilato. Yeah, Kanavesa. Yeah, yeah. So, congratulations, first of all, for the great heal of an album, I would call it. I mean, that inspired you to create the idea of this conversation, as you say. It is a privilege for me to be on this show. For me, it is a show of the moment, really, because the idea is quite creative and unique. And I'm representing Oxfam today, as you have said. I work there as manager for our resource governance program here in Zambia. So in order to keep to that time you have given me, I prepared some notes.
Thank you.
So that I stick to the time. Yeah, but also today I just want to mention that I will attempt to build on last week's program with Jenny from FIA, Fight Inequality Alliance, which is one of Oxfam's strongest partners in the fight against inequality, not just in Zambia, but in the world. So today I'm hoping that we can go a bit in some little bit of depth into the faces of inequality in Zambia, and also the drivers behind this inequality. And hopefully through the interaction with yourself as the host and the viewers, as you have said, we can spend a lot more time discussing the ways in which people, especially the youth, are fighting inequality. So allow me to say something briefly about Oxfam. So Oxfam is a global movement of people working together to end the injustice of poverty by addressing the inequalities that keep people poor. So in Zambia, Oxfam works with partners to save, to protect, and rebuild lives when disasters strike. Oxfam helps people to better their lives for themselves and for others by connecting smallholder farmers, for example, to markets and building their resilience to climatic shocks. Now, Oxfam also champions women's and youth rights. We convene and we build capacity of local partners and citizens to hold government accountable and the private sector in how natural resources are being utilized and ensure that the benefits accrue to the Zambian people, especially the women. So going further into today's discussion, I will give you 4 examples of the faces of inequality in Zambia, and also 4 drivers of inequality, and hope that that can help us with starting the conversation. Afterwards, I'll touch briefly on what Oxfam and partners are doing specifically on this subject of inequality. So starting on the faces of inequality in Zambia, inequality has many faces, but I'll just give 4 of them. And I'll start with something that is dear to my heart and is central to Oxfam's work, which is gender inequality. So one of the long-term goals of Vision 2030 is to eliminate gender inequalities in socio-economic development. It may interest you, Fumba, and the viewers that to know that reducing developmental inequalities is actually one of the 5 strategic focus areas of the 7th National Development Plan. This actually is the first for Zambia, and we have to be proud of this. So when looking at gender inequality, it is important to recognize the demographic fact that the larger population of Zambia are actually females, accounting for 50.5% as compared to males at 49.5%. And you also see now that despite women accounting for the largest proportion of the economically active in Zambia, that is 51% as compared to men at 48%. The proportion of those women in formal employment, it falls below that of men. So according to the statistical agency, in 2017, 67% of formal jobs belonged to the men, compared to only 33%. So again, according to the first quarter of 2019, the labor force survey, of the 828,944 formally employed people, 236,340 were women, as compared to 592,605 who were men. So you can imagine the differences here. So in terms of youth, when you narrow it down to the youth, 62.2% of those employed were males, while 37.8% were females. So the trend continues. And you also see in Zambia, it's very evident that most women are in the informal sector, meaning that they are not registered with any licensing authority, they are not registered with any taxation authority. So they have no safety nets and are really very, very erratic and low income. Especially now that it's COVID-19, which has disrupted a lot of the work. So in terms of education, you find that men have higher education attainment, and somehow this can be linked to why the wages are so different between males and females. You also see that 39.2% of adult women have reached at least secondary school in Zambia, compared to 52.4% of adult men. Political representation, only about 18% of parliamentarians right now are women. And we also see a lot of gender-based violence, which is really underpinned by our social and gender norms that have kind of normalized and justified sometimes GBV. Yeah? This time we are in now, the situation is even more unique for young women. Prolonged school closures, for example, we don't even know when schools will close. What is happening to a lot of the girls, in terms of increased risk of teenage pregnancies, sexual abuse, child marriages, and so on, when you compare that with boys. So that's about gender, and allow me to move to the second aspect of the faces of inequality. This is about rural and regional inequality, yeah? Rural, urban, and regional inequality. So from the start, again, I want to quote an important statistic. So Zambia's population as at first quarter last year was estimated to be around 17.381 million people. Yeah. So 52.6% of us in Zambia lived in rural areas, while 47.4% were in urban areas. But then you see that poverty is highest in rural areas, sometimes even as high as 80%, especially in provinces like Luapula, northern, eastern, and western provinces. So that's important to consider when we're looking at these disparities. Last year also, of the 1,500,000 plus youths who were employed, 33% were in the rural areas, while 66.6% of those were in urban areas. So then, when you look at the shocks in terms of flooding and other impacts of a humanitarian nature that happen, the rural economy faces much more difficulties, especially in terms of bringing things back to normal. They suffer more health and livelihood challenges and generally poorer quality of life. It interested me quite recently during a parliamentary debate in our National Assembly, where one MP lamented that government did not seem to want people in rural areas to own cars, and basically for him, government did not want people in rural areas to have an improved living. So he was saying these sentiments a little bit in a crude way, but it was his reaction to the revelations of the Committee on Energy that of the 344 service stations that are in Zambia at the moment, only 11 of those, Fumba, are in rural areas. Can you imagine that? Yeah. So having said that, it doesn't mean that conditions in urban areas are perfect. Yeah, because crowded conditions, poor sanitation lead to safe water and weak healthcare are quite constant reminders for us on the inequalities within peri-urban and urban areas. The kuna kwa phenomena. Yeah?
Yes.
Kabulonga, Kwamisisi. So it doesn't mean that things are perfect in urban areas. Yeah. So the third element I want to quickly talk about is unequal and unfair taxation. I want to see if I can go to some specifics here to just help our viewers appreciate this a bit more. So Zambia's tax system has largely been regressive than progressive. So in simple terms, what this means is that the tax system is not necessarily designed in a way that reflects the ability to pay. Yeah? So the burden seems to lay more with a few employed people and the poor, often contributing, in this case, to low tax morale and even compliance problems because of this. Yeah? So a soon to be launched a fair tax monitor report for Zambia shows, for example, that pay as you earn, yeah, which is personal income tax, has consistently contributed more to government treasury than corporate income tax over a period of 10 years. Yeah. So this is in part because of the challenges of ZRA in allowing too many tax exemptions, but also just the inability to curb tax dodging. We have quite evidence that suggests that this is going on a lot. So because of tax dodging and related practices, so you see that companies contributing significantly less as compared to individuals. So this can be unsettling, where you have companies paying less tax than individuals. So to illustrate this, I want to draw attention to the latest report, or the 11th edition of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, EITI report, which says that pay as you earn contributed more than company income tax. So basically, pay as you earn contributed 14.5% as compared to corporate income tax, which is 13.7%. Imagine that. So the share of indirect taxes also have really stood at a level that is showing worrying signs. So as at 2018, this was 54%. So indicating that the tax system is moving away from being progressive. This is because indirect taxes tend not to discriminate, and the burden falls quite heavily on the poor. Last year, in 2019, Oxfam produced this report with partners in the COSAD Poverty Observatory Group. So it is produced often to give a picture of what's happening in terms of poverty and inequality in Zambia. So this latest report, it indicated that indirect tax collection increases poverty because the benefits to households that come through subsidies, for example, are outweighed by indirect taxes that they pay. So as a result, households face higher prices on basic goods and services. Now, today, during COVID-19, we see tax relief for big companies, like the suspension of export duties on the export of concentrates from mining. Now, I think we ought to be asking what tax relief and even incentives have been put in place for the struggling small businesses. You know, FSD Zambia in its recent survey showed that 72% of these micro and small businesses are actually not able to raise funds during this COVID-19 period. So when you compare, you can see that there isn't much to be talked about in terms of equality there. So lastly, on the phases of inequality, I want to talk about income inequality, very much at top line level. Now, I don't know how many people know this, but Zambia is number 4 among the 10 most unequal countries in the world. Others, you know, yeah, you did you know?
No, I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know.
No, that is quite serious.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, exactly. So it is a serious statistics, and it should cause us to really reflect. So the other countries are South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Honduras, Central African Republic, Lesotho, Colombia, Brazil, and Guatemala. So I think a simple statistic to illustrate this situation is that while on the one hand, 10% of the population accounted for 50% of total income in Zambia, this was around 2010, by the way, on the one hand. On the other, 10% of the population held under 2% of the total income in this country. Now, I suspect this situation is unlikely to have changed. So let's see what happens when we do a lot more studies, especially with the census. So let me now quickly move to the drivers of inequality and just talk about 4 of them. So the drivers are, what are these things that push inequality up and make it an issue in our society? So the first one I want to talk about is poor governance and administration. So these are like systemic drivers, yeah? So basically governance decisions and policy choices by those elected into power. For example, what is going on now on public debt, and this is not unique to Zambia. That is definitely a governance issue because it has a significant impact on the quality of life of the citizens. The second thing I want to talk about here is the ineffective use and application of issue-based mechanisms for people to participate in. Yeah? And here, I think one of the important things is the planning and budgeting process, which remains really highly exclusive at the moment, and the preserve of mostly the learned people. So in this case, you see that we need much more to be done to expand the ways in which citizens can come to the table and take part in planning and in budgeting, for example, so that what is being decided is responding to their needs and their capabilities and what they can do to be part of economic activity. So, but in some cases, it's fair to say that this is also because of just the sheer lack of interest by some citizens to get involved. The second one is on market failure. Now, historically, especially for us students of development studies and economics, we have seen that Europe, America, they have very good stories of how the market brought prosperity. East Asia, but this has also resulted in concentration of wealth in the hands of a small minority. This causes inequality to rise when you have very few people controlling so much wealth. Jenny spoke to this last week in her quoting some of the Oxfam's work that we have worked on in the past at global level, which we use, by the way, from time to time to challenge and make those in power uncomfortable and to reconsider the economic models that are being pursued so that they become more redistributive, they become more equitable, so that they protect the weak and expand opportunities for all of us. So one such platform is the World Economic Forum, commonly known as Davos. The third, in terms of drivers, whom I want to just quickly point out, is the capture by political elites. So time and again, we have heard of local politicians being cited as having vested interests in mining companies, the petroleum sector, grain buying and transportation, especially now that the harvests are there. There are many examples. But this basically has caused them not to make sound decisions to resolve the challenges in the sector because of those vested interests. And I think just the last point on this one is the continued reports of capital flight, money going out of the country, which in part indicates how a hold on power by a few who in turn want to keep their money away, which was ill-gotten, robs the citizens of the much-needed resources to lift their standards and also save lives. The last one is corruption. Now, this is definitely a big one, and the talk of the day. Almost every day we have this in the media. So the government has made commendable steps. It has to be said. And for me, the notable one here is the enactment of the 2018 Public Finance Management Law. It is a good piece of legislation by and large, and among the highlights of that law are the improved sanctions for officials who steal public funds. Previously, they were quite weak. However, January this year, the Corruption Perception Index put Zambia at number 113 out of 180 countries globally in terms of corruption. So abuse of funds and financial malpractices are always, and like a normal thing now in terms of the Auditor General's report. You know what to expect. It's just about the numbers, how much has been stolen. But every year we expect that this has to happen, which is not right. And this reflects the gaps in public finance management. The Financial Intelligence Center report in recent years, especially since 2016, have consistently showed these problems. For the 2018 report, for example, showed suspected tax evasion, fraud, corruption, even money laundering transactions amounting to about 6.1 billion, which is about $520 million. This is a huge amount of money, which is suspected to be going out and not responding to the development needs that we have. We know the cases now of corruption even have code names. 40, is it 42 by 42? That's the fire engine issues, 48 houses, the construction sector scandals, petroleum, and there are many cases where corruption is being spoken about, and it's like commonplace now. So I now conclude by just sharing with you a few things Oxfam is doing to fight inequality in Zambia. So we've been conducting quite a bit of research on this subject and analysis, which links to some of the global research we do. So using this to build active citizens and movements, generating debate around this issue and advocacy. And I think some of the efforts I can refer to here is the Beyond the Numbers initiative, which is around the national planning and budgeting process. So this is about improving the quality of stakeholder involvement in the budget process and to influence the outcomes of the budget so that it really truly serves as an instrument for allocating resources to reduce poverty and inequality. So ending violence against women and girls is another piece of work, and we have a campaign called the I Care About Her. And then we also have a campaign that we support called the Kulinganiza campaign, and it also has different names in other languages, which is basically to even it up.
Yeah, I think we've lost his connection. I'm hoping that Mr. Eneya will come back. So, for those that have not listened to the album yet, for those that have not listened to my latest album, which is Here I Live, I would ask you to visit my website and get to listen to the music that we have and that speaks to the issues that Eneya is talking about. Okay, so we
Yeah.
have him back. Yes, welcome back.
To what point did I lose you?
Yeah, you disappeared, and there you are. Yes, you can continue. I was telling the people that those that have not listened to the album can get the music on www.pilato.com. And if you have no time to go to the website, you can actually download the app, which is PIMU, on Android and on iPhone, Apple platforms. So you can continue there.
Thank you so much, Fumba. And so I'm not sure exactly at what point you lost me.
I think you were talking about, you were just concluding, saying in my conclusion, you're talking about Kulinganiza. I think you were on Kulinganiza. And yeah.
Okay, all right. So thanks. So I was just saying that a big focus of that Kulinganiza campaign, which is about evening it up, is looking at how revenue, money coming out of the mining sector can better meet the needs of the people. Those who live in mining areas and even non-mining areas. And I was just saying that I've seen a good part of this expressed in one of your songs where you are trying to explain the mismatch between the wealth that comes from mining those minerals, which when they go, they basically disappear forever, and the suffering and the little benefit coming out of the people, especially for you, those that are actually putting in the sweat. Yeah? They are called Vashmine, meaning miners. So those are some of the things that this campaign tries to do. And I know that you and other artists are familiar with this work, and you'll be doing lots of things on your own. Other artists, Biflo, Kantu, Wezi, those guys, Peterson, I've seen them do quite a lot of these things, when a chocolate and so on. Even when Omond Musonda on board this, which is quite brilliant.
Yes,
So the other campaign for us, yeah, on gender inequality is called I Care About Her. This is a campaign that looks at ending violence against women and girls. Lastly, I just want to talk about, to mention a newly launched campaign. This is not just in Zambia, it's in several other countries, Uganda included, which is to make tax work for women and girls. And then at the moment, during the times of COVID-19, we are very interested in public debt and how it impacts on the negative impacts on us, on our country, on our revenue base. It may also it may interest you to know, Fumba and the viewers, that last year government spent 8.8% of total revenue on health, as compared to 32.6% to pay debt. You can imagine how much money that should be going into health is going to pay debt. Recently, about 35 kilometers away from where I am now in Lusaka, 35 kilometers, there is a health post that, not a health post, because it's not, a place which people are calling a clinic. It's a madhouse, and it is used for health officials to go there to do measuring of the things that are needed for under 5, like weight of children and so on. This is today in 2021, and this is less than 50 kilometers from Lusaka. If you live in Luangwa, you are seeing electricity for the first time for some residents only this year. Luangwa is less than 200 kilometers from here. So anyway, without going into too much detail, these are some of the things that we are working on. Oxfam at global level is also leading some advocacy on the people's vaccine. That is what it is called, so that when we have the COVID-19 vaccine approved, it's accessible to everybody in the world, even those who are in middle-income countries like ours, because some people tend to think that we have a lot of money so we can afford it. But really, the numbers and realities on the ground require that countries like ours also need that support. So we have that campaign going on. There's a link called www.peoplesvaccine.com. People can go there, look at the conversation and the petition that has been signed by thousands of people. Lastly, we are also looking at how we can encourage health systems, policymakers, to use the COVID-19 as a wake-up call for this agenda for quality universal access. to health, yeah, using the resources that we are getting for COVID-19 to be accountable for them and use them to ramp up our health system in a way that it can be more resilient and meet the needs of our population. I think for me, I just want to say that let us together construct a different reality, starting with sharing in our chat box. And I know that there's a chat box on this platform. Ideas, for example, on what we think the opposite of inequality ought to be, even in a mother tongue, as long as someone indicates which language that is. But also, more importantly, talking about what are you doing about inequality in your community, in your institution, in your family, etc. So I would like to end here, and I hope that I kept the time you gave me.
You didn't keep time, but obviously you were interesting, so we didn't pay attention to time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Eneya. Yeah. So I will obviously kickstart the questioning, and then we'll get to pick questions from our viewers online. Eneya, what's the difference between poverty and economic inequality? Like, so when you're talking about inequality economically and poverty, what's the difference there?
Okay. I want to put it in a very simple way. And I'm sure we can hear some more ideas from viewers on this channel.
Yes, so the people are now commenting and adding ideas and questions and comments. So I'll be picking them slowly as we proceed. Yeah.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, I'm still not able to see what. I can see them now. So yeah. So inequality is a big driver of poverty, meaning that where an economy becomes more and more unequal, the levels of poverty tend to also go up. So inequality aggravates poverty. And some of the examples I have given where resources are being concentrated in a few, and you are making it difficult for economic opportunities, for example, to be accessed by those who are brilliant. They have the papers, they have the skills, they can't get money from, let's say, like the stimulus monies that are going on at the moment, or any opportunity, including education and bursaries. If you have people who are deemed to be coming from certain backgrounds, failing to get certain opportunities because those that are in a much better place in society have kept those to themselves, you are increasing poverty. That is one way I can explain it.
Thank you very much. So let me just pick one good thought from our Facebook platform. So this is Henry Malumo. Henry Malumo says debt service is a big blow to service provision. That is why government should consult widely before contracting huge resources. That's Henry Malumo.
He is spot on.
Yeah, and this is coming from Lewin TV. Lewin says we need an enabling environment for us to do business. So these are some of the comments, and obviously I'll keep on. This is coming from Nyambe Mbanga. Eneya and Pilato, when you talk about inequality in terms of pay, is there a survey that was done, and how much is the average gap between men and women? I ask this because I always thought that pay, especially in structured organizations, are aligned to the position and responsibilities assigned to an individual. So, Eneya, that's your question from Nyambe Mbanga.
Yeah, so the figures I was quoting are actually from our statistical agency here, and they were aggregated figures. So they were looking at it overall in Zambia in terms of earnings, and the authorities were looking at formal employment, not just in the highly formal work like is being described, but across the sector. So those are the figures that the government is telling us, that we have men earning more, much significantly more than women. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure Banyambe, you've gotten that. There's this one from Maemo Mario. To tackle the issue of inequality, don't you think we need to look at our tax structure? E.g., former students are having their salaries slashed, no matter their level of income. We can learn from Netherlands, bursary scheme?
Yeah, Fumba, this is a really important point because on the one hand, yes, you need tax, but on the other, you really need to do it in a way that it shows that you are applying the tax burden equitably. And excuse me, some of the things that I have said involve recommendations to government on how best to do this. And not just in terms of how progressive the tax system is, but also how it takes on board certain good characteristics of a tax system, because we know that tax is the most important ways in which government realizes money to meet the needs of development that we need, and to reinvest in sectors that can even do better and even generate more jobs like agriculture. So one of the recommendations that was made is for government to have a sit back and relook the tax system in this country, to not only look at the progressivity, but also other things like how pro-poor is our tax system. To what extent does it promote investment in reducing poverty and many other areas? To what extent is our tax system not giving away too much in terms of incentives that sometimes companies don't even need as a motivation to invest? But it is also making it possible to realize something for the government. So definitely, yes, there is need to look at our tax structure and improve it.
This one is coming from Dilys Judge. It says only thousands of people in the formal sector pay taxes to cover the needs of millions of ordinary Zambians. That's an interesting opinion. Would you like to?
Definitely spot on as well.
Yeah, because I also I keep asking people that if the working class is if we depend on the taxes of about 10% or 20% of the total population, how do we build, how do we even grow the economy? How do we sustain even public service? So now, Eneya, Jane last week mentioned something that was very profound, and obviously I would like to hear your thought about economic growth. So we keep hearing about the economy growing, and yet we still have people that cannot afford clean water for themselves. We see numbers rising. We see all these statistics about the economic growth. How come we still have people that still do not have access to clean water? You go to the hospitals, there are no medications, no drugs, and doctors and nurses poorly paid. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a paradox, but it's not impossible to deal with. And I'll just give some of the examples. So one of the examples is relying too much on the market forces to redistribute wealth. So just having companies around opening businesses doesn't in itself lead to poverty reducing. Obviously, growing an economy is absolutely essential for poverty to reduce. And unfortunately, at the moment, that growth that you have spoken about has actually suffered quite a bit in recent years. We used to be around averaging 6-7% for several years until recently, maybe after 2015, we started having challenges to meet the kind of growth levels that we had. And right now, we are, as of last year, we failed to even go above 2%. And this year, it's minus 4% as a modest projection of how our economy will be. So we are not even growing enough to make a dent on poverty. But other than not relying too much on the market forces, you need policies that redistribute the wealth that you have so that you can have a dent on poverty. You need to use some of that money to reinvest in sectors that impact on poverty. As an example, I gave agriculture, which when you ramp it up, you can actually achieve more because majority of the people are involved in that sector, and they are in the rural areas, which earlier on I described as experiencing the highest poverty. To be able to reduce poverty while you are growing, you need policies that make sure that you have a strong social protection system. That is why in Western countries, when you go there, most of them, if not all of them, make sure that there's a very strong social safety net, meaning there has to be a floor. There has to be something which is the equalizer that helps people to be healthy, to be active, and compete for those opportunities in the economy. And those are absolutely essential to reducing poverty. In Zambia, we have an example of the cash transfer, which has been lauded as being quite good as a way to try and reduce poverty. Only one type of poverty, by the way. So there are several things, but I think key is for government to determine what it needs to do and the instrument it needs to use in terms of participating in the economy, creating a good environment for business to thrive, especially local businesses that make sure that we are resilient, but also make sure that money is invested in those things that improve the social well-being of people, health, education, and the other things I spoke about.
And yeah, when is debt, national debt, that foreign debt, whatever debt, bad for a country? Yeah. When is debt bad for a country?
When is
debt?
When is debt bad for a country?
Bad for a country, because like I'll give you an example. Here we get money. People are saying we want this, we want that, and the government gets a loan, and then we do what the people are saying. When is it bad for a country? Because yeah.
All right, so I'll give maybe 2 or 3 examples. Number one, just like at individual level, debt is bad for a country if you don't have the ability to pay for it. So it is nice to borrow, but you really have to think carefully about what you, how you should pay it back, because debt is a constitutional expenditure. When we get it, it must be paid, even if it means that you and I go hungry. That is how it is. The second one is that debt becomes bad if you have made the wrong choices on what to do with that debt. For example, you invested in things that do not stimulate enough economic activity, things that do not meet the need of the people, things in terms of economic activity that don't help you to pay back that debt in the medium to long term. Then debt is definitely bad. So debt, when it begins to compromise your ability to invest in social services and saving lives, that is definitely bad debt. Debt that begins to cripple your future generations because they have to be paying for money which they can't see the benefit for. For me, that is bad debt. Otherwise, as we all know, countries do borrow, individuals do borrow, but it's about how it's done and for what purpose the debt money is used for, and the choices that are made in terms of what to do with the money.
Okay, so thank you, Eneya. James Chiti says, how are you, Oxfam, tackling the inequality with regards to taxes between companies and individuals?
Yeah, so for us, I think there are a few ways that this is being done. A few years ago, for example, we did some work and made a connection with the revenue authorities to show how tax dodging, particularly in terms of transfer pricing, limits the amount of money that the government takes away from the mining sector. So we did some work, some research, and proposed certain things that the authorities could look at in terms of improving the rules and minimize the practices of cooking the books, if I can call it that, and having relationships between companies that make it confusing for government to see where you need to tax them on account of being related companies. Other things that we have done more recently, like I said at some point, is where we have looked at the tax system using a methodology called the Fair Tax Monitor, and we have shown how the way that tax is being done now is unequal. And so you highlight in those kinds of reports ways in which government could consider looking at the tax system through different ways, through incentives, for example, which actually lose a lot of money if you don't target them very well. And we are encouraging government, for example, to cost and to weigh the benefits and losses of giving those incentives to companies versus what it gets, and being able to produce expenditure reports by our Minister of Finance so that we can see and have confidence that what we are giving away is worthwhile.
This one is Amon Piri. Amon says, how do we boost our economy if up to now we still have to travel overseas and spend millions of kwacha to acquire a degree in engineering only to come back home and become a bricklayer? Because of higher levels of corruption, many capable young men who are supposed to occupy these parastatal companies, I don't know, I can't see anything more than that. So how do we boost our economy given that situation that Amon has shared?
Yeah, I mean, that is really, that is stark reality, and it's painful. It's really painful when you read that message of how someone, their spirit will be dampened. I think there are two sides to that coin, in my view. Excuse me. The first one is for people who have that level of knowledge and expertise to try and assert themselves and find ways to demand opportunities where they exist, and sometimes to create those opportunities in the formal economy for themselves through businesses, through partnerships, and see what can be done, even amongst just ourselves in Zambia, form companies and so on. Of course, there are barriers to that, and we can spend the whole day here talking about them. But the other side of the coin is for government to create opportunities for local players to participate. So His Excellency, the President and the Minister of Finance, since COVID-19 started, have been singing one song, which is that let's stop being over-dependent on imports. We are a high import country. Now, how do you stop being dependent? It means that you need to support people like what Amon is saying, who are here and they have the skills in different sectors that can start businesses that are owned by locals. But they need support, they need incentives, they need an environment that helps them to compete. And this can be done through initiatives like having local content and local participation legislation, not like the ones that we have now, the way they are described in the CEC Act or the Mines Act, where you have so many layers of confusing things about citizen influence, citizens, what have you, and that creates so many loopholes. Those are not very empowering. You need to be quite deliberate, and you need to provide the opportunity for locals to feel that you are giving them the opportunity to be part of boosting the economy from within, because they need to be more resilient. When they partner with outsiders, it's being done in a way that is really making sure that a lot of the money stays here, as opposed to now where most of the businesses make the money here and take it out through the banks to where the money came from.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Eneya. I'm encouraging a lot of ladies to share, to ask questions and share thoughts, so then we can have a very equal representation. This one is coming from Lighton Piri. Lighton says, I have a question for Mr. Eneya. Why is the economic growth rate diminishing when government spending is increasing? That sounds more economics, eh?
It's a trick question. At the moment, first of all, government spending is driven by a lot of things. And unfortunately, one of them is paying for external debt and domestic debt. So the figures I spoke about, for instance, in terms of comparing paying for health and paying for debt, just have to do with external debt. But government has these priorities. For example, paying for workers. So the economy is diminishing, partly because we have an economic crisis brought about by a health crisis, which is COVID-19. But it has to be fair that even before COVID-19, our economy was under strain, and the factors are many. Some of them external, but most of them, as has been agreed even by economists in this country, have had to do with the kind of choices that we have made in terms of our investments, in terms of our taxation policies, in terms of having budgets year in and year out that are expansionary in nature, meaning that we refuse to apply a lot of the good policies that were in, for example, something called Zambia Plus, a key part of which was to do something called fiscal consolidation, where, in short, you are trying to spend within your means. But when you see ourselves spending more than we are able to mobilize resources, investing things like buying military equipment and investing a lot in public order and so on, then you will find that mismatch that Lighton is speaking about.
Thank you. This is Anstance Fometu. Says, lack of reflective governance. Women, youth at the table of the way forward. Great conversation, Pilato. So I think she's just sharing a thought and says the lack of reflective governance. And Bwaria Kapambwe says neoliberal-driven policies can be drivers of inequality too. Policymakers should put the needs of the poor first. Very interesting topic, she says as well.
Yeah.
Diless Judge again says there is such a lack of accountability in Zambia, and the one that suffer the most are women and girls. Yes, I remember a conversation where somebody had said inequality has a female face or face of a female. I don't know the right construction of a word, that English sentence. Yeah. So
I mean, if you can just allow me to comment quickly on that.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I mean, the accountability question is really, really important. It's even more important because as we are now, as compared to say 15, 20 years ago, we have a lot more opportunities to hold government accountable because we do have a significant amount of information. Yes, we do have challenges in terms of transparency. For example, around the debt that we have, government is making steps to be making this information available, but there are still gaps there. But then one has to say that we have quite a bit of information that we can use. And I did refer to some of them. Information are some of the sources which are actually government sources. So it's very difficult to dispute the kind of numbers and information that comes out of that. So finding and sharing on platforms like this, how best do you hold accountable government? How best do you hold leaders in our communities? Where I am now in this area, there is a councillor, there is an MP. How are we holding those people accountable? Because they are our duty bearers. So it's really important for that accountability question to come in and for people to start thinking about it now and make it a central part of conversations. For example, ahead of the 2021 elections, how, for example, do we make corruption a moral issue as well and make it an accountability issue and expand the scope of morality from just sexual morality, for example, which is all over the media at the moment. So I think that this is really an important question around accountability.
This one is coming from Hagai Zimba. Hagai says, this is a very important, enlightening discussion. My only concern, Pilato, is what are you doing to ensure even the uneducated and underprivileged access and share their views on this platform? So the idea for this project is that after the album, it is my wish and prayer and hope that we can get these conversations on different platforms. And for this program, it is my plan that if I get to have resources, it's a program I would like to put on radio stations, in community radio stations, so then we can allow as many of our people in outside of the digital space to join in and participate. I remember what I said earlier. I said the actual expression of power is a power that exists in ordinary people. And this is, if we are to achieve anything as we deal with inequality, it must come from the people themselves. And And the idea for this project is to take it to the people and then let the people speak and share their views, so then we can make tangible progress. This one is coming from Kasha Siamunyanga. Kesha says, how can local companies take advantage of the diminished economy? Are there special services to assist entrepreneurs, especially in the internet business? Wow. Is that something you can respond to, Eneya?
Yeah. I feel quite inadequate to respond to that. But I do think that having to understand where the opportunities are at the moment is a good place to start. When the Minister of Finance, for example, speaks during this period of COVID-19, he is talking about the instruments that are there, for example, in terms of funds that are there for local private sector, not just dismantling areas for those that gave goods and services to the government, but also new facilities, particularly through CEC. And you will be amazed at how many of those types of institutions and facilities we have in Zambia in different ways, not just money. National Technology Business Council, in terms of resources to research, like the Technology National NSTC, the National Science and Technology Council, CEC for Citizen Economic Empowerment, many of them. And I think that a good place to start is to understand where those opportunities are in terms of finance and so on, and see how you can access them. It's hard. This is why, for example, the financing facility, the 10 billion that went to the banks, is a constant issue of public debate, because that money still can't get to those that need it. But I think for me, a good place to start is to map where these opportunities are that exist and see how local companies can tap into them. But also creating, I think the idea of creating ideas and going into opportunities that are there is also a good place to start. You know, where there are problems, sometimes there are also opportunities.
So I've been Sinkala says, we have a lot of experts in economics, mines, agriculture, name it. Why not use them to get sound advice? Yeah. So I probably, before you answer or respond to this thought, I wanted to ask you to find out from you. Do you think globalization, to a certain extent, is an inequality driver? I ask that because as we become one global community, you tend to see even job losses. So you get people working from or doing jobs. I'll give an example of the digital era, where now people would prefer advertise on Facebook and not on movie TV, where somebody would prefer subscribe to Netflix than movie TV. Do you think this globalization has in any way results or adds to inequality levels in the country?
Yeah, Fumba, you are absolutely. I think that the answer to that question is a definite yes and a no. And I think we have seen this in many parts of the world, where on the one hand, globalization, for example, gives me the opportunity in Zambia to access a market which is beyond Zambia. For example, in this era, when I am doing my business online, I am able to do that business in an integrated manner using different service providers, and I can get my product to someone who is in Norway. That is taking advantage of globalization. At the same time, globalization has come with huge conglomerates, for example, companies that come and choke up local industries because, for example, they might have easier access to finance that crafts business models that are relatively cheaper as compared to the, let's say, local manufacturers who are suffering under the strain of a high cost of production economy. and therefore their businesses get stumped over by the bigger companies. And because of that, you are driving inequality and driving out the local participants from a particular market. So it is a double-edged sword. It just needs to be tamed. And similar conversations and fears are coming up when it comes to our own version of that, if I can call it, in Africa, the African Continental Free Trade Area. It will also come with those two things. It just needs to be tamed. Recently, I was listening to someone from the Copperbelt Chamber of Commerce, based in Dola, who was proposing ideas to the government through the Minister of Commerce on how they can make sure that globalization through the African Continental Free Trade Area does not add to the erosion of local manufacturers here, but you are able to do that in a way that you help to grow infant industries, provide support, and get them to compete better. So it's a double-edged sword. And this question about experts is really a tough one to answer, because it's not just people operating in the business environment. This one has to do with people being part of making policies. And these days, you really have a lot of questions around the caliber of some people who are involved in making policies, particularly at the political level, because at the technical level, I have to tell you, and I'm sure you agree with me, that we have a lot of expertise in Zambia. And someone before Sinkala said this, there are a lot of learned people, there are a lot of smart people, highly qualified people in Zambia, even in the mining sector. But somehow the formula to harness this expertise and knowledge to benefit the economy is being compromised by the undue influence of sometimes those that are in politics, because they can call the shots in a way that a technocrat, even at the very high level, is unable to do the right thing.
Thank you, Eneya. So we obviously coming to an end, but I'm trying to see if I can find a last question that could trigger, that could put you in your concluding remarks. And I'm trying to. I just ignored Ms. Ozitembo's comment. I just ignored it, but I'm trying to see. Okay. As I'm doing this, you can start winding up. You can do your concluding remarks. You can say goodbye to people with obviously with the call of action. What do you want people to do? What do you like to do? What do you think people should start doing? Should start thinking? What are you asking people to do?
Thanks, Mumba. I would say that in tackling inequality starts with you and me. I think it's important to acknowledge that. And it should be about challenging and changing the value systems that have shaped our norms, our systems, our institutions, and made this inequality something that seems acceptable and normal in our society. I think it's possible to deal with inequality, but it needs to start with what we can do about it ourselves in our various spheres of life and our communities, and really make sure that we don't accept to live with inequality, because it affects us in one way or the other, and it drives poverty, like we said. And for us at Oxfam, for example, we will not live with a world that has poverty, because we have more than enough resources to go around.
Okay, so thank you very much, Eneya, but I would like to respond to that thought from Java. Java is Simukoko is a friend, and he's asking, speaking of inequality and taxation, what's your take on taxes curated to make the poor more poorer? For instance, wheelbarrow tax.
So my simple take is that there are certain taxes that are put in place without doing very good homework in terms of what has informed that decision for doing that tax. I think that there are several ways that we have, for example, recommended in several studies and research on how you can invest more in understanding, for example, what the impact will be when you impose a certain type of tax. I spoke about the bad impact of a lot of indirect taxes, for example, And this is an example where you try and do taxation in a way that maybe you won't even get as much to meet the objective of what you get out of that tax. So for me, the point is, I think more can be done to research and understand the impact of certain tax policies before imposing them. Clearly, people who push wheelbarrows, you and I will agree that what they get there is just from hand to mouth. And for you to go and tax them, what is the objective? And the other thing is, what are you going to put that tax to use? What are you going to use it for? That in turn is going to service that person who is pushing that wheelbarrow. If you look at it critically, there probably isn't a connection between what a wheelbarrow person will give and what they will get in return that will benefit them and their business. So sometimes it's really investing a lot more in understanding how taxes will play out on those that we're imposing them on.
Thank you very much, Eneya. I think we've had our time, and thank you very much again for coming through and for sharing your thoughts and what Oxfam is doing to address inequality issues in Zambia. To everybody that tuned in, thank you very much. See you on Friday. So on Friday, it's going to be very economics. So we've aligned a very profound economist who will come and talk about policies and economics and inequality. So then those questions that people were asking about the economy growing and people still remaining poor, I think on Friday we'll have an opportunity where we can ask such questions to somebody who is an economist and to get answers. Thank you very much once again. If you've not listened to the album, if you've not gotten the album, it's www.iampilato.com. The album is called Here I Live. And if you are one that would like to download it, go on your Android and your Apple platforms, look for PIMU, PIMU, and download. And the album is a project on inequality. And all the best. Thank you.